It was my second night working as a caretaker at the hotel in Virginia City, Nevada. An old mining town relic that smelled like whiskey, dust, and old secrets. I'd taken the job for the solitude. After the mess of my last relationship, being alone with creaky floorboards and peeling wallpaper seemed like a blessing. The manager, Mrs. Hargrove, had only one real instruction. When the sun sets, lock the front doors, no exceptions. And if anyone knocks after that, don't open them. She said it with the kind of flat seriousness that made me want to laugh but didn't. Instead, I just nodded. Why? I asked. You don't want to meet them, she said, turning the key in my hand. Trust me. It felt like small-town hazing, a little ghost story to keep the new guy on edge. Virginia City thrived on haunted tours and paranormal tourism. The whole main street was a museum to death and gold. At night, with the gas lamps flickering outside and the wind howling through the narrow alleys, I could see how stories might feel real. But inside, I was in charge. I had the master keys, an old brass flashlight, and the run of the place. My duties were simple. Check the halls for vagrants, make sure the heating pipes didn't freeze, and be ready to open up for guests in the morning. The first night passed without incident. I locked the doors, heard the wind scrape against the old windows, and went to bed in room 14, supposedly the least haunted. Nothing happened except a radiator hiss and a dream about water dripping somewhere. But tonight, the building already felt different. It was colder. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust or blood. The walls groaned more often, and the gas lamps flickered without wind. When I passed the old ballroom on my rounds, I swore I heard music. A single piano note. Held too long. When I stepped inside, the room was empty, lit only by the moon through tall, dirty windows. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the air. I tried to shake it off. Old buildings make old noises. My footsteps echoed up the grand staircase, past framed photographs of miners and their wives. All their eyes seemed to follow me. By 9 p.m., the streets outside were empty. I stood at the front desk, flipping through the guest registry just to have something to do. Most of the names were decades old, but one page caught my eye. In a shaky hand, someone had written, Toni. Room 14. Last night's date. The thing was, I hadn't signed it. The pen was still on the counter. The ink looked fresh. I checked the logbook again, heart thudding. Above my name, in the same shaky handwriting, was another entry from the night before. Don't open the door. The words hadn't been there yesterday. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe Mrs. Hargrove was messing with me, or one of the housekeepers had keys. But then I remembered. I'd been alone all day. No guests, no cleaners. No one had touched that book. That's when the knocking started. At first, it was faint, just a dull tap from the front door. I froze. The old brass key Mrs. Hargrove had given me felt suddenly heavy in my pocket. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Tap, 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 tap. Faster now. I stepped toward the door but kept my hand away from the handle. Through the beveled glass, I could make out a tall shape. No features, just a darker shadow against the night. Sorry, I called, my voice more nervous than I intended. We're closed. The figure didn't move. The knocking stopped. But I swear I heard breathing through the wood. Slow, rattling breaths, like someone trying to keep calm. Then, in a voice like dry leaves scraping together, it whispered, Let me in, Toni. The sound of my name made every hair on my arms stand up. I backed away. I don't know you. Silence. Then the knocking began again, harder now. Not fists, but something sharp, clicking against the wood. I stepped behind the front desk, trying to remember if there was a back exit. The figure moved. I saw the shadow slide sideways past the door and out of view. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. I told myself it was over, until the sound came from the ballroom doors behind me. 3 knocks. The 3 knocks on the ballroom doors were soft. Too soft to be from a person trying to get in. They were measured, almost polite. I stared at the frosted glass panels, but there was no shadow on the other side. Just the pale light of the moon spilling in from the windows. "Mrs. Hargrove?" I called out. My voice echoed in the empty lobby, bouncing off walls that seemed too eager to return the sound. No answer. The knocks came again. 3. Slow. Hollow. The urge to leave was screaming at me, but some strange pull, stubbornness, curiosity, something worse, pushed me forward. I stepped closer to the ballroom doors and reached for the brass handle. The moment my fingers brushed it, the knocking stopped. The silence felt heavier than the sound. I opened the door just enough to peer inside. The air hit me first, cold, damp, and smelling faintly of mildew and something sweeter, almost like flowers, but wilted. The room was empty, just as I'd left it earlier, except for one thing. At the far end of the room, in the faint moonlight, a single chair was sitting in the center of the dance floor, facing me. I didn't remember it being there before. I scanned the room, my flashlight beam cutting through dust motes. No footprints on the warped wood. No sign of anyone. But the longer I looked at that chair, the more wrong it felt. Like it was waiting for me. I shut the door. Back in the lobby, I checked the front entrance. The shadow outside was gone. No movement, no knocking. The street beyond was empty, the wooden boardwalks gleaming faintly with frost. For the next hour, I tried to keep busy, checking the boiler room, wiping down the front desk, avoiding the ballroom entirely. But the building seemed to hum around me, like it was holding its breath. Then I heard the piano, one note at first, then another. Slow, halting, like someone relearning an old song. The sound was coming from the ballroom. I froze. The piano hasn't been tuned in decades, and it didn't play itself. Not that I'd ever heard. The music continued, the notes stretching into a faint off-key waltz. My stomach turned cold. I should have stayed in the lobby. I should have ignored it. But my feet were already moving. When I opened the ballroom doors, the chair was still there, but now it was turned toward the piano, and the piano keys. They were pressing themselves. No hands. Just keys dipping down like invisible fingers were touching them. I watched, unable to breathe. The waltz stuttered, then stopped. In the silence, I heard a whisper. Not from the piano. From the chair. I couldn't make out the words, but it was low and urgent, like someone was speaking through cloth. I stepped forward, and that's when I noticed the floorboards. They were darker around the chair. Wet. A slow, seeping stain spreading outward, smelling faintly metallic. Blood. I stumbled back. The chair tipped forward, just slightly, as if something had stood up from it. That's when the lights went out. The ballroom plunged into darkness except for the silver blue of the moon. My flashlight flickered and went dead in my hand, even though I'd just replaced the batteries that afternoon. The whispering grew louder, circling me. It wasn't one voice now. It was many. Overlapping. Desperate. I could pick out fragments. Too late. The mine. It's still down there. Something brushed my arm. Cold. Solid. I bolted. I didn't stop until I was back in the lobby, slamming the ballroom doors shut and locking them. My breath came in sharp, painful gulps. That's when I noticed the guest registry was open again. A new line had been written in that same shaky hand. Don't go downstairs. The basement. I'd been told it was just for storage, a place they kept old furniture and broken fixtures. But I'd also heard the miners used it during the Comstock days. Tunnels running under the city, connecting saloons, brothels, and escape routes. And now something was telling me to stay out. Which meant something down there was waiting for me. I told myself I wouldn't go down there. I repeated it like a mantra while pacing the lobby, trying not to glance at the heavy oak door behind the reception desk that led to the basement stairs. But every old building has a gravity to it. The walls seemed to press in, the shadows stretched toward that door, and the whispers, faint at first, began again. Only this time, they were coming from below. It wasn't a steady whisper. It rose and fell, sometimes urgent, sometimes drawn out, like the building itself was breathing. I caught single words in the noise. Help! Down here! Toni! Hearing my name again made my stomach tighten. I grabbed the flashlight. It flickered when I turned it on, but stayed lit. For now. My fingers brushed the brass key ring Mrs. Hargrove had given me. There was only one key on it I hadn't used yet, long and old-fashioned. It fit the basement lock perfectly. The door swung open with a groan, releasing a wave of cold air. It was heavier than normal cold, like the kind you feel when you open a freezer that's been sealed for years. The stairs were steep and narrow, the wood warped with age. I could see dust drifting in my flashlight beam, but no cobwebs. That struck me as wrong. The whispers stopped as soon as I stepped inside. Halfway down, I noticed the walls weren't brick like I'd expected. They were rough stone, dark and damp. In some spots, the mortar was crumbling, revealing what looked like blackened timbers. Mining supports. I reached the bottom. The air was thick, tasting of earth and iron. The basement stretched out farther than I thought possible, the far end lost in shadow. Old furniture lay stacked against the walls, cracked bed frames, warped dressers, a rocking chair missing one arm. But there was something else. A door, metal, heavy, bolted shut with a chain so rusted it looked fused in place. The beam of my flashlight passed over a faded stencil on the metal, Shaft 3. It didn't make sense. There weren't supposed to be mine entrances inside the hotel. At least, not anymore. I stepped closer. That's when I saw the marks on the floor. Scratches. Dozens of them, gouged deep into the stone, leading from the metal door toward the stairs. Long parallel lines, like something had been dragged. Or like something with claws had been trying to get out. A noise came from behind the door. It wasn't a whisper. It was a slow, dragging scrape, followed by 3 hard knocks, exactly like the ones I'd heard upstairs. My flashlight dimmed. The chain rattled once, then went still. I started backing toward the stairs, every instinct telling me to leave. But before I could take 2 steps, a figure stepped into the light. It was standing in the far corner of the basement, half hidden in shadow. Tall, but wrong in the way it held itself. Hunched, its head tilting too far to the side. I froze. The flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I saw its face, or what was left of it. The skin was gray and drawn tight, the eyes pale and clouded. A miner's helmet sat crooked on its head, the leather strap rotted through. Its mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, revealing teeth that looked cracked and jagged. Too late, it rasped. I ran. The thing didn't follow at first, or maybe it moved too quietly for me to hear. My boots thudded on the stairs, the old wood groaning under my weight. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, my breath tearing at my throat. But then the knocking started again. Not from the basement, from the ballroom. The ballroom doors rattled in their frame. It wasn't just knocking anymore, it was pounding, so hard the glass panes shivered. I backed toward the front desk, scanning for anything I could use as a weapon. The heaviest thing I saw was the brass desk lamp. I yanked it out of the wall and gripped it by the base, my heartbeat so loud it drowned out the sound for a moment. The pounding stopped. Silence. I crept closer, keeping just far enough from the doors so nothing could reach through if the glass broke. My breath fogged in the cold air. That's when I noticed something strange. Frost was spreading across the inside of the glass. Not from the edges, like condensation. From the center, in a jagged web-like pattern. I reached out without thinking, my fingers almost touching the icy glass. A face slammed against it from the other side. I stumbled back, choking on a curse. The face was the same one I'd seen in the basement. Gray skin, dead eyes, miner's helmet tilted on its head. But here, in the moonlight, I could see more. Its skin was torn in places, black earth packed into the wounds. Its jaw hung at a broken angle, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was more of a wheeze than a word. Open! I shook my head. No. Its pale eyes flicked down, like it was looking at my chest. Then it smiled. A cracked, horrible smile. and stepped away from the glass. Something moved behind it. Not one thing. Many. Figures emerged from the shadows outside, each one wearing tattered remnants of mining gear. Dust-coated boots, rusted helmets, filthy work shirts stiff with age. Their faces were all wrong. Collapsed in places, teeth showing through skin, eyes milky or missing entirely. They stood still, as if waiting for a signal. The first one, the one I'd seen downstairs, turned and pointed at me through the glass. The others began to move. They didn't knock. They scraped. Their nails, long, black, and broken, dragged across the wood and glass with a sound that made my teeth ache. I backed away, my mind racing. The note in the guest registry. The whispers. The warning not to go downstairs. These weren't just ghosts. They were the men from Shaft 3. I remembered something from a haunted tour I'd taken years ago, before I ever thought about living here. The guide had talked about the 1873 Yellow Jacket mine fire, how it had burned for days underground, killing dozens of miners. Some bodies had never been recovered, the tunnels collapsing and sealing them in. And those tunnels ran right under Virginia City. The pounding started again. This time, it came from both the front door and the ballroom. I could hear glass cracking, hinges straining. The phone on the front desk rang. The sound was so sudden I nearly dropped the lamp. I snatched the receiver, my voice shaking. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered. Low, urgent, almost like a whisper in my ear. "Toni, leave now." It was Mrs. Hargrove. "How?" "They're outside. They're already inside." The line went dead. The ballroom doors burst open. Cold flooded the lobby like a physical force, my breath frosting in the air. The miners stepped through. Not fast, but deliberate, as if they knew I had nowhere to go. Their boots left wet, dark prints on the floor. The smell of damp earth and burnt wood rolling ahead of them. The one in front, the leader, if you could call him that, raised a hand. The others stopped. He stepped forward, his boots squelching against the warped floorboards. Up close, his eyes weren't just pale. They glowed faintly, like lanterns flickering in deep darkness. "Still burning," he rasped. "Still down there." I realized then, they weren't here to kill me. Not yet. They wanted me to go back down, to the shaft. I gripped the lamp tighter. "I'm not going." His head tilted, the broken jaw shifting with a sound like snapping wood. "Yes, you are." The lights in the lobby went out. Something cold and solid closed around my wrist, and then I was being pulled toward the basement door. The grip on my wrist was like iron, impossibly strong for something that should have been dust a century ago. I tried to twist free, but the cold seeped into my bones, numbing my fingers until I dropped the brass lamp with a dull thud. The other miners closed in, forming a silent wall of gray faces and milky eyes. Not one of them blinked. The leader dragged me toward the basement door. My boots scraped over the warped floorboards, the sound far too loud in the heavy silence. When we reached the door, it swung open on its own. The stairs yawned below, blacker than night. They forced me down. My flashlight, still clipped to my belt, flickered on and off like it couldn't decide if it wanted me to see what was coming. Halfway down, the air changed. It was hotter, thicker. I could smell smoke, not the faint, stale kind from a fireplace, but sharp and choking, like something was burning nearby. At the bottom, the basement stretched out exactly as before, except now the metal door marked Shaft 3 was wide open. Beyond it was a tunnel. The timbers lining the walls were charred black, some still dripping with what looked like melted resin. The air shimmered faintly, as if from heat. The miners pushed me forward. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the tunnel seemed to swallow sound. My footsteps felt muffled. Even my breathing was dampened, as though I'd already stepped into another world. The deeper we went, the hotter it got. Shadows clung to the walls like tar, and sometimes they shifted, pulling back just enough to reveal faces. Soot-streaked, hollow-eyed, mouths moving soundlessly. When the tunnel opened into a cavern, I thought for a moment I was seeing fire. But it wasn't flame. It was light bleeding from cracks in the rock, molten orange, pulsing like a heartbeat. The heat coming off it was unbearable. The leader stepped into the glow, turning so I could see him fully. His skin steamed. The edges of his clothing smoldered, but never caught. "It burns forever," he rasped. "We burn forever." I realized then, the mine fire had never gone out. Not really. It had just gone. Deeper. And whatever it was still hungry. The miners began to chant, low and guttural. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the meaning in my bones. Stay, stay, stay. The leader pointed at the fissure in the rock, the molten light spilling through. "We can't leave, but you can join." My legs locked. "No." He stepped closer. His breath was smoke and ash, and when he touched my shoulder, the heat burned through my shirt, blistering skin. "You've already opened the door." I remembered the registry, the messages, the knocks. It hadn't been random. They'd been softening me, step by step, making sure I'd come down here. Something moved in the light. It wasn't a person. At least, not anymore. Its form shifted constantly, like fire and shadow stitched together. Eyes bloomed and vanished in its surface. It pressed closer to the crack, and the rock hissed where it touched. The leader stepped aside. "It wants you." I took a step back. The other miners closed ranks behind me. Their eyes glowed brighter in the firelight. The thing in the fissure spoke, not in words, but in a deep, rolling sound that bypassed my ears and slammed straight into my mind. Images flooded my vision. The mine collapsing, men screaming, the fire catching and never dying, the thing in the dark finding them. And then I saw myself, down here, my skin cracking, my eyes going pale. Standing in the ballroom someday, pointing at someone new. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears even though it wasn't a sound I could block. Something hot and wet dripped onto my arm. I looked up. The fissure was weeping molten rock, and it was reaching for me. In a burst of panic, I shoved past the nearest miner. My shoulder connected with something solid, but when I looked back, there was nothing there, just smoke. I ran. The tunnel seemed longer than before. Every step was a battle, the heat pulling at me, the whispers clawing at my thoughts. My vision blurred, black spots eating at the edges, but I didn't stop. I burst into the basement, slamming into the metal door. It groaned as I shoved it shut, the heat instantly dropping, the whispers fading to a low hiss. The chain, the rusted fuse chain, was whole again, wrapped tight around the door. I didn't question it. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the lobby, and threw the basement key into the darkest corner I could find. Empty. No frost on the glass, no shadows outside. I didn't sleep. I sat at the front desk until dawn, staring at the ballroom doors. When Mrs. Hargrove came in, she took one look at me and said, "You went down there." I didn't answer. She sighed, almost like she'd been expecting it. "You'll leave today, and you won't come back." I thought I'd take her advice. I really did. But now, sitting here in the daylight, I keep hearing it. 3 knocks, not from the front door, from the basement.
Thank you for watching C&T Horror Stories. Please like and subscribe for more stories.